I'm John Lorden, and I've been looking into mysterious occurrences on YouTube since 2015. Joining me today are some friends from uncovered.com.
I'm Rachel Roslett, a forensic psychologist and head of case research and data at Uncovered.
I'm Andrea Cipriano. I'm also a forensic psychologist, and I'm a case researcher and content creator at Uncovered.
Welcome back to LordanArts Uncovered. And today, we're looking into the suspicious death of 19-year-old Adrienne Salinas. In the early morning hours of June 15th, 2013, Adrienne was leaving a birthday party that she was hosting and called a cab, but she never made it to the pickup location. A month later, her remains were found in the Arizona desert. Tempe, Arizona is part of an inner suburb located between the core city of Phoenix and the rest of the East Valley. Many people know the location since it's the home of the main campus of Arizona State University and right near the Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Locals are familiar with the desert climate, the flat streets, and the frequent trips over the Salt River to go to Scottsdale for countless restaurants and nightlife. Adrienne was familiar with the 15-minute drive north to visit her longtime boyfriend, Francisco Arteaga. Let's turn it over to our case experts to learn more. Rachel, Andrea, what can you tell us about Adrienne and the people in her social circle?
Adrienne Celeste Salinas was a 19-year-old student at Gateway Community College in Maricopa, Arizona. Adrienne was an aspiring journalist, and her father describes her as an intelligent, responsible, and motivated young woman who loves watching movies and reading. She was also incredibly close to her younger brother.
Adrienne has been described as vibrant, which matches perfectly with the fact that she had a tattoo of a sun on her neck just below her left ear. She also wore a lip piercing with a clear stone. And by all accounts, Adrienne was a warm and loving person who would do anything for her friends. She was also loyal, which could help explain how Adrienne had her longtime boyfriend, Francisco Arteaga.
At the time of her disappearance, Adrienne and Francisco were on again, off again. The pair met when they were in elementary school, and they started dating in the 8th grade. Their romance continued through high school and even beyond. It's fair to say they essentially grew up together. However, Rebecca Flores, one of Adrienne's 2 roommates and a longtime friend of hers, said that they were, quote, an odd couple because she says Francisco was overall a very awkward guy, and he didn't see their young love as intensely as Adrienne did.
Now, I know in other cases that have kind of similar dynamics like this, police will frequently look at the partner of the victim with heavy scrutiny. Before going forward, do we know if Francisco was ever considered a suspect in this?
When Adrienne went missing, Francisco really tirelessly participated in all of the searches, and he spoke extensively with law enforcement. He was cleared as a suspect at the beginning of the investigation. Their on again, off again dynamic can probably be explained because they were so young when they started dating. And as they grew up and grew into adults, there were bound to be some bumps on the road.
Yeah, definitely. So in Adrienne's social circle so far, we have the boyfriend, Francisco, and you've mentioned one of, I believe, 2 roommates, Rebecca Flores.
Mm-hmm. So Shani Dugan was Adrienne's second roommate and also a longtime friend. Shani has shared with the media that the 3 girls, while they were best friends, they also had their own group of friends that didn't overlap. And the large social circles come into play with the timeline of Adrienne's disappearance.
So this brings us to Friday, June 14th, 2013. And that night, Adrienne and her roommates host a birthday party. Shani has said that the 3 girls were the first of all of their friends to have their own place. So when one of Rebecca's friends wanted to have a birthday party, Rebecca and the girls offered to host. They lived in an apartment complex near West 5th Street and South Hardy Drive in Tempe.
Rebecca and Shani later told police that this was the biggest party that they had ever thrown in their apartment. All 3 girls, again, invited their entire friend groups. So there was roughly 40 people in this apartment by 10 o'clock at night.
40
Many people at the party.
In an apartment?
Yeah.
Man.
I'm sure their neighbors were not happy.
Yeah. I hope they weren't on the second floor. Jeez. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It's a college dream of packing your apartment with all of your friends.
Yeah, man.
So, I mean, even though that would have been a dream for so many people, everybody at the party that night said that Adrienne did not seem excited and that she wasn't feeling social at all. So it's important to note here, too, that there was alcohol and many people in attendance were drinking, including Adrienne.
So, in an attempt to make the best of the situation, Adrienne invites her boyfriend, Francisco, to the party last minute. She leaves him a voicemail saying that she wanted him to be there. Several friends said that their relationship was sort of going through a rough patch then, as they transitioned into this college life. Alex Hill, one of Adrienne's closest friends, who was not at the party that night, said that the pair had recently been getting into fights about labels.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us have seen a lot of relationships that kind of go through this, especially relationships that start so young. I mean, they're dating each other from middle school essentially on, and then that big life change into college can really put a lot of strain, and a lot of these relationships don't make it through that. And it sounds like they were kind of at that point trying to figure out where do they go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex says that Adrienne wanted a committed relationship, but Francisco thought it was a good idea to, quote, see what's out there, figure themselves out, and date other people. So when Adrienne invited Francisco to the party well into the evening, she was hoping that they could put that ongoing argument aside and just have a fun night. But at some point, their conversations devolved into the same discussion. And some reports even go as far as to say that Francisco was talking or even flirting with other girls at the party.
So as their conversation starts to get heated, the pair decided that they should leave and go somewhere more private. So around 2:30 a.m., Adrienne and Francisco leave in his car to drive over to his apartment in Scottsdale. While at his apartment, the couple continues to argue.
Okay, and let's just take a look at the distance real quick. We mentioned that it seems like it's about a 15-minute drive. Google, of course, has all kinds of different ways to get there. You could take roads. This is kind of leaning on the freeway use. I think it's thinking it's probably faster because the speeds are faster on the freeway. But we're looking at essentially just under 12 miles, about a 16-minute drive from where she's living to where he's living. So when Adrienne and Francisco are at his apartment, do we know how long their conversation lasts there?
It doesn't last long at all. Adrienne says that she wants to leave to go back to the party around 3:30 in the morning. And she's so adamant about leaving that she actually leaves on foot. And she makes it a couple blocks down the street before Francisco pulls up in his car next to her and insists on driving her back. And she finally agrees and gets into the passenger seat. So while they're on the road, roughly about 20 minutes later, their argument hits a peak. And Adrienne actually gets out of the car at a stoplight by Hayden Flour Mill, and she walks the rest of the way home.
So just that first step that you're talking about, she's saying that she's going to go on foot from his house back to her place. I mean, that's not even feasible. Like, we're looking at 11,
Right.
12 miles. So it seems like she's probably highly emotional. We do know that there was alcohol at this party as well. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, definitely determined to get back. Obviously Francisco is being a gentleman, looking out for her and saying, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but she does eventually get out of the car here at Hayden Flour Mill, which is about 1 mile away from where she lives, approximately a 20-minute walk to basically get her back. So at this point, does Francisco drive off and leave her there?
He doesn't. He actually hangs with her. He's driving next to her while she's walking, keeping an eye out for her. But when he gets close enough to the apartment, he eventually drives on. But while he's driving, Francisco calls Rebecca and says, hey, Adrienne and I got in an argument. She got out of the car. Can you make sure you keep an eye out for her so that she gets home safely? And of course, Rebecca said she would look out for her.
And Adrienne does make it home safely. Other people at the party say that she's seen talking to Rebecca when she gets there, and she actually starts to charge her own phone with a timestamp at 3:40 a.m. But there's a quick turnaround here. So Adrienne decides that she actually does want to be with Francisco and probably continue their conversation. So she actually quickly hops into her car and begins to drive back over to Scottsdale.
So at 3:44, Adrienne gets into a single car accident about 3 blocks away from their apartment. A Starbucks employee who was working at the time says they saw the whole accident take place and that Adrienne cut off another driver and then hit the median. We know that 2 of her tires pop, making the car inoperable. The Starbucks employee calls 911 to report the accident, but Adrienne has already left the scene before officers arrive.
I'm just hearing a lot of frantic movement here. And of course, one of the things I get concerned about when I hear someone leave the scene of an accident is she's worried about being busted for DUI or something like that. So I think that's a possibility in this case. Obviously, we can't say that, but even outside of that, maybe what's more important is there's obviously very big charged emotions that are also going on with this night. This is a night that is lingering on into the early morning hours. We've got a lot of kind of dangerous factors going on here. But the place where this actually takes place, once again, not very far from her home, pretty close to where she got out of the car, as a matter of fact, to walk back home, about a mile from her place. This is an interesting twist. On the map here, it looks like it's a roundabout, which makes, I don't want to say makes sense for the accident, but makes a little more sense. Sometimes these roundabouts, they come up on you quick. You're on a long straight road for a long time, and all of a sudden there's a median essentially right in the middle of the lane. And if you're not aware that, oh, this is a roundabout, I got to go around it, I could kind of understand her running right up into that median and doing this kind of damage. Like you can see this tire took a really good shot on something very solid. But for some reason, when I check the satellite view, it's showing just a regular intersection. So I just wanted to let you guys know about it. Whenever we hit discrepancies like this, we want to point them out so that you understand them as well. I would think that this is probably, maybe the satellite view is old. Google driving directions are based, I think, off different data, and that's why we're seeing a roundabout here. But regardless, this is where that accident happened.
That was a pretty severe set of damage that she did to those tires. It's either she struck something more than the median, or she struck that median at a high rate of speed. I'm feeling.
Well, and the other thing is where the damage is. The sidewalls have been completely ripped open. So it's like she grinded up on something. It really does sound like a median. Like she kind of nailed it front ways, and then the car might have kind of jagged, or maybe she tried to correct it by turning the wheel and then just shredded her tires coming off of it. This one in particular, like all that sidewall damage. Your tires, the sidewalls are quite a bit thinner than the tread, because obviously the tread is made to touch the road. The sidewalls aren't. But yeah, it's bad. It's bad whatever happened there. So what does Adrienne do after she leaves the scene of this accident?
Adrienne hurries right back to her apartment, but she's largely unseen by her roommates. The only reason that we know that she did turn back is because there are photos from that night where the second time around, Adrienne is wearing clothes that she didn't have on at the beginning of the night. So this was an outfit that her roommates recognized as something that was previously put away in her room. And
now,
the
hold on a
FBI...
second. Something else that just tickles in my mind about that. Why are you changing clothes in the middle of the night when you get home from a thing like that? It just, once again, just kind of seems to be leaning towards the possibility that, if someone witnessed her leaving the scene of the accident or something, now she's in a different, a different set of clothing.
Or could she have been injured in that accident?
Possibly, yeah.
Hit her head, had blood on her clothing. But it's very, why would you do that? Because she seems so intent on getting back to Francisco. Why would you pause to change your clothes if you didn't need to?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that intent, honestly, only continues because the FBI concluded that, so when she got back to the apartment, she also packs an overnight bag and she frantically tries to get in touch with Francisco.
So according to the police, Adrienne called Francisco 11 different times between 4:10 and 4:50 a.m. Now, he's not picking up on any of these calls. Eventually, at 4:43 a.m., she texts him and says, I'm on my way over. After that text, Adrienne places her last outgoing phone call to the Scottsdale Cab Guy, which is a local taxi service. During this call, Adrienne requests that a driver pick her up at the AM/PM convenience store on the corner of Hardy Drive and University Drive. She's matched with the driver, who is Thomas Simon Jr., and he says he'd be there in about 10 minutes.
So friends said that they don't ever recall Adrienne taking a cab at any other time. And that night, they also believe that she didn't have any money to pay for the cab as well.
Very strange. Now, this is a short walk, only about a third of a mile here, about 6 minutes on foot. But it does raise some questions just in terms of, you're calling a cab. Why aren't you getting picked up at home? It's kind of interesting.
I think they obviously didn't know that she had wrecked her car at the time. And so I'm sure that behavior seems out of character when she had her own ride. Why would she call a cab? They didn't know at the time that she couldn't drive her own car.
I also want to point out, I actually kind of just did a little virtual walk of this on foot. I just wanted to kind of see this area becomes very important because essentially this is kind of where her last known whereabouts are. And there's a lot of homes here, a lot of apartments, but not a lot of businesses, unfortunately. And that's kind of what I was hoping to see would be more businesses, because then you have more opportunities for cameras. We've got kind of industrial businesses here. Really not until it gets down to that intersection do we get the types of businesses that are likely to have surveillance cameras. But you've also got a lot of people that she's walking past here. There's a lot of different apartment buildings, a lot of people that could be coming and going. Here, as we get closer to where her cab is supposed to pick her up, we do start seeing some businesses, restaurants, and stuff like that might have some surveillance. One of the big ones that we will be talking about that's important is this O'Reilly Auto Parts that is kind of right across the street. As we get to University Drive here, this is the AM/PM that she was supposed to get picked up at, right here on the left side.
And I think what's interesting is, why is she getting picked up not at her apartment, but at this AM/PM, which is in the opposite direction, really, that she needs to go?
Yeah, that's another interesting aspect to it. One of the things I was thinking about is maybe she was worried that if she got picked up at home, they would drive her by the scene of the accident. Maybe she didn't want to get anywhere near where she had wrecked her car. So she decided if she goes down here, their path to where they're going is going to be University. They're going to take University to either one of those main streets to go north, or all the way to the freeway to go north. And she would certainly avoid the accident scene. Just a thought, though. I mean, it's hard to tell. I mean, there's just such a frantic nature that's going on with all of her movements around this. It's very, very hard to tell.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed.
And I think what you were saying too, John, about, trying to essentially profile why she would pick that location and then think of the driving and the different direction to get away from the car. Who knows if Adrienne was thinking that way at the time? We just don't know. Yeah,
I have no idea. Or who knows if the business didn't have some requirement of like, tell us we got to pick you up at a main intersection, or, something along those. Or she had some other reason why she wanted to go to the gas station. AM/PM would still be open. She wanted to pick up something. I don't know. There's all kinds of different possibilities on that.
Right. So at this time, we're at 4:52 in the morning, and surveillance footage across the street from the AM/PM convenience store captures the image of a young woman who matches the description of Adrienne. The female in the footage can be seen walking 1 minute before the cab driver calls Adrienne's cell phone number. And Adrienne picks up and she says that she's almost there. So while this next footage, the full O'Reilly Auto Parts footage, isn't available to the public, we do have a still image. And we know that you never see Adrienne at the gas station and you never see her get into a vehicle.
So this still image here that's public, you can really make out the Scottsdale cab guy parked in the background there. Thomas, the driver, says he tried to reach out to Adrienne multiple times before he got there, but he didn't reach her. And it was later determined that Adrienne's phone had been turned off or died around 5:07 a.m. That was the last time anyone really saw or heard from her. So it's really at this narrow window of 14 minutes where she goes missing between the call at 4:53 where the cab driver calls her and she says, I'm almost there, and 5:07 when her phone turns off or dies.
And as far as we know, she's never seen at the gas station. We know the gas station certainly has surveillance. We know that they're using this O'Reilly Auto Parts from across the way, and they have some surveillance. We don't hear from law enforcement that they ever capture her on surveillance at that intersection. So something strange has happened. That's why I spent so much time kind of doing that walk and just seeing what other locations could have been here. Was there anything that would have grabbed her attention and made her change her mind about what her plan was? Do you guys have any thoughts on why she wouldn't have made that 6-minute walk?
Well, your thoughts wander. I mean, could she have seen someone she knew and they said, hey, I'll take you wherever you're going? It might have been appealing to her if she really didn't have any money to pay the cab driver. It feels to me like she is so desperate to get to Francisco that if a quicker opportunity was presented to her, she'd be like, yeah, sure, let's go. Because, she's just so frantic at this point, it appears.
Mm-hmm.
And that opens up different possibilities. I mean, it could be someone that she knew or an acquaintance or something that, along the walk, she's like, oh, I should go ask this person. She could have headed off into any of those apartment buildings or homes that we saw on that stretch there to ask someone for the ride that she needed. Or the possibility that it was a stranger, someone that sees, a pretty young girl walking down the street on the side. Oh, you need a ride somewhere?
Yeah, whatever happened, it's just one of those, she was so close to this cab and yet apparently so far away that something happened there.
Andrea.
What stands out a lot to me is, so we know from what the police have shared with the public that, and the FBI has said this too, that we know that she starts charging her phone just before 4:00 and she's home. She's the roommate said that she was upstairs in her room, which is why no one saw her at the party. But she's alone in her room, calling and texting within this 40-minute window. So her phone is probably charging this entire time that she's sitting there hooked up to the cord, texting, calling, the whole thing. So it's interesting to me that her phone would either die or shut off at 5:07, because you're thinking at this point, she probably has, if her phone was close to the battery dying, she's probably at like 30-40% battery by now, maybe even more. Yeah. And still her phone shuts off. To me, that's super interesting.
Yeah, that raises a really important question about why did that phone shut off at that point? Is that the time of some type of interaction where someone might have grabbed her or something?
Yeah, did she shut off the phone or did someone else shut off the phone for her?
Yeah. So when does this officially become a missing persons investigation?
Adrienne's father, Rick, and Adrienne had been planning to spend Father's Day together on June 16th, which was that Sunday. But when Adrienne didn't call or connect with him on Father's Day, he absolutely began to worry. It was uncharacteristic of her to vanish like that. So he contacted both Adrienne's roommates and Francisco, all who said that they didn't see her since the early morning hours of the 15th. But by 2:30 p.m., her dad is definitely worried and he reports her missing.
So that Monday, which is June 17th, Rick and Francisco actually find Adrienne's car 2 blocks away from where the accident occurred. The car was presumably pushed out of the way of traffic. So they call the police and to come and have the car processed. And while they're doing that, the family finds a notebook and an old BlackBerry cell phone underneath her driver's seat. And they take pictures for the police, noting its location.
There's already some strangeness happening here. Her car is found 2 blocks from the accident.
Right.
Mhm.
If you're if you're a fellow motorist or just good do-gooder, you're not going to push it 2 blocks away.
No, I'm almost wondering.
I also found that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if like a tow truck found it and they pulled it off to that spot for some reason. But then if they did, why wouldn't they have reported it? Or yeah, that's already
You would
strange.
think too. Even the Starbucks worker who was clearly opening, being there so early the other night, they would have probably gone back the next day and have either seen that the car was sort of in the area, or maybe they even saw somebody pushing this car out of the way. I would just think that if I saw the accident happen and then a day or so later still see the vehicle in the area, I would call again and say, hey, I called this in the other day. Why hasn't anyone taken this car?
Yeah.
Well, I can't imagine that law enforcement would just let a car sit in that place anyway. So, because it would be a traffic hazard, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially if it is really a roundabout, there's no way that it's just sitting in the roundabout. Someone had to clear it out. But you would think that whoever came across it would be like, first thing you would do is call law enforcement. Like I just don't understand how it moves.
Well, and you would think that if law enforcement came out, found this wrecked car in a median, they need to move it because it's obviously a traffic hazard. Wouldn't they impound it immediately and take it somewhere?
Yeah. I don't know.
So
maybe that's what's so mysterious.
It's different out there. I don't know.
It's funny you mention that because the day later, investigators do finally notice that the car was never impounded for the forensics team. So when they do go out and tow the car, where the family was, hanging out by the car and everything, they're unable to find either the phone or the notebook that the family took pictures of. So the police later discovered that the items were turned over to Adrienne's mom. But when she turned the items back over to the police, she didn't have the phone with her. And no one has been able to explain where this old BlackBerry cell phone went.
I mean, 2013, yeah, it's a little old for BlackBerries. I mean, I know we had some people in politics that were still rocking BlackBerries well past. But yeah, that's kind of strange. And why would the family not turn that over? Like, that's just, I don't know. Was there something on it? I have no idea.
I'd personally like to know a little bit more, like how did Adrienne's mom get that property to begin with? Did the police call her? Was she the registered owner of Adrienne's car? I would love to know more about that as well.
Yeah, and I think there's some fair consideration for, law enforcement sees situations like this, particularly with people that do flee DUI situations, right? So they probably weren't treating it like, oh, this is going to be evidence for a murder investigation. They had no idea what was coming a month later.
I agree.
But it is just a big kind of question about, even at this point, like, can't we track it down? Like, isn't it important to the family to have this solved? Like, I don't know. I have no idea what could have happened with that. Weird.
So the police also spend a lot of time interviewing those 40 partygoers, and they determined that they don't feel anyone in attendance was capable of doing anything harmful to Adrienne, and that everyone was accounted for. Both Thomas Simon Jr., who was the cab driver, and Thomas Simon Sr., who owns the Scottsdale Cab Guy, they were both cleared of suspicion by law enforcement, even though Thomas Jr. refused to take a polygraph. But also, so would I. So I don't know that means that there's anything nefarious there.
Yeah, no, but knowing that was the person she was supposed to meet up with is interesting to me, because let's say for some reason he sits there, he waits for a bit, maybe... I don't know, maybe he knew her in some way, or maybe when she called it in, she did say where she actually lived, but she wanted to be picked up somewhere else. Like, he could have flipped his car around, started driving up the street. Oh, there's that girl that I've been trying to, I mean, especially nowadays, we're so used to like Uber and Lyft. Like, how often are we meeting up with basically a vehicle in motion practically nowadays? So for that situation, like, just knowing that's who she was supposed to get to, I'd really be looking in that direction pretty strongly, especially if investigators took any time at all to check out their Yelp. There's just a couple things there. First of all, it's saying that this business is closed. So let's just start with that. Their reviews, not very strong, a 1.5 out of 5 stars. They basically have 1 5-star review, 1 4-star review, and everything else is 1 star. Some of the stuff that stood out to me, I wish I could give 0 stars, so unprofessional. As a matter of fact, based on some of what I'm reading here, I'm surprised the cab driver even showed up, quite honestly, that he even got there. I will never use them again. Scottsdale Cab Guy is an unethical company and not to be trusted for pickup or any representation they make to a potential customer. But this one from Lauren C. really stands out to me. Never again. Rude, smelly weirdo that was trying to ask me out. Yuck. To make matters worse, he went the longest way possible and ripped me off. Just some questions there in terms of, I think, the type of people, and this is one of these people, one of these drivers is who she was supposed to meet up with. So I think looking in that direction was probably on law enforcement's mind in some way. Do you know if they actually did question him, Andrea?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you're so right. The police definitely had him on their mind as well. So in the original video, again, the full video that's not released to the public, we know that Thomas hung around the gas station for about 10 to 15 minutes after he was supposed to pick her up because, I'm assuming he wants the business. He wants the ride. And so we know that he actually parks and he actually has a smoke break. He takes a cigarette. So he is hanging around there quite some time thinking that she's going to show up. He does eventually continue his night. He does pick up other riders. So, we do have that record that he does continue working. And so, again, the police do look at him as a suspect for some time. They bring him in for questioning. There's some footage out there about the interviews that the police did with him. And to be quite honest, when I watched them the first time, I was a little shocked. He's definitely what I would call a character. When they first bring him in, you can see him there. He's shirtless. The police tell him to relax. And so what he says his version of relaxing is like kicking around the trash that's in there. And just, being a little bizarre. But so from those interviews that they have with him, the police do secure warrants for the taxi that he uses. It's this only car. And, you can see some pictures here. But ultimately, when they do some, forensic looking at the car, they find that it hasn't been cleaned. There's no evidence of bleach or any type of something that would indicate that you're cleaning up something you don't want other people to know about. And there's no trace evidence at all of Adrienne in his car. So she did not get in his car. Yeah,
based on what we're seeing here, this isn't a vehicle that is probably even maintained properly, let alone been cleaned after a criminal act or something like that. And he's honestly pretty lucky, I think, that they have that footage from O'Reilly that really catalogs all that time. Because can you imagine if they didn't have that? And this is part of what's challenging about investigations like this. This guy pulls a ton of focus and attention. And if they didn't have that footage saying, hey, we know exactly where he was for that time period, and we know she wasn't with him.
I think for me, and this happens a lot when we look into these cases, the thing that struck me is there are so many bad elements swirling around Adrienne. Whatever happens to her, somebody obviously picked her up or grabbed her, right? So you have that bad element. And then you have this cab service, which has some really shady reviews. It's like the world was conspiring against this woman that night. And it always seems like when we start to look and peel back the layers, we see how many times people run into these, are so close to these difficult people or shady people. And there's just a lot going on for Adrienne this night.
Yeah. So ultimately, due to the various reasons we mentioned, law enforcement does not see him as a viable investigative lead, which totally makes sense. So now it seems like this could have stayed a missing persons case for a long time had there not been a huge storm, right?
Exactly. On August 6th of 2013, after the area was pummeled with a sizable monsoon storm that left some areas under 6 feet of water. A man who was walking through a desert wash in the Apache Junction spotted what appeared to be human remains. When Lieutenant Alan Ackey from the Tempe Police Department went out to the scene, he knew almost immediately that this was Adrienne because there was a bracelet on the skeletal remains that he recognized.
DNA returned from the lab confirms that the remains are Adrienne's. There is a lot of details that investigators still do not know regarding the time Adrienne disappeared and the day her remains were found. They don't know when her body was dumped in the area, but they do know that she was probably buried for a good bit of time, narrowing down the time frame. They can't tell how she died. The state of her remains when she was discovered definitely didn't provide a lot of forensic type evidence to point to someone.
Right. The autopsy report contains the 4 following statements. So the first one being, 1, that the condition of the found remains was consistent with the body being in the desert for the same amount of time that Adrienne had been missing. 2, that there were no obvious signs of trauma or serious injury observed to what was remaining of the skeleton. 3, the cranium and the top 2 vertebrae were missing. And 4, there were no tool marks and no evidence of intentional decapitation.
So this means that they don't still have all of Adrienne's skeletal remains then?
It sounds like that, yes. The report is heavily redacted, but there doesn't appear to be any mention of her head or hands. But again, there's really not an obvious sign or any obvious indication that these parts are missing intentionally. Despite the otherwise inconclusive autopsy reports, police are treating the case as a homicide investigation. They believe that someone dumped her body somewhere in the desert, and then this rainstorm washed her remains out of her grave to where they were ultimately found in this wash.
Oh, so that's not where she was dumped. That's just where her remains wound up because of the storm.
Correct.
Yeah, I just want to take a look at this map again because I don't think it's any accident. First of all, we're looking at 30 miles away from where she lived. So we certainly have a vehicle involved in this crime in some way.
Yep.
But outside of that, I don't think it's any accident. Look at where like all the street lines stop and look at where she's found. I mean, she is basically found right at the edge of where, I mean, even the homes are thinning out here. We're really starting to get into just desert and kind of state parks that
feels like the end of civilization.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a few little clusters of some homes around here, but it's no accident. This is someone that was certainly trying to hide this. And that's where I get concerned about when we're talking about that her head and her hands are missing. But obviously, if they were forcibly removed, usually there would be some cut marks or something on the bone that remains, and they would identify that and say, okay, we know that these items were removed. Where I think it's hurting this case is they can't identify a cause of death. Obviously, they didn't find any type of knife wounds or bullet damage to the parts of her skeleton they found. But the head is such a susceptible area for that type of damage. I think it would just be really helpful to the case if they could somehow, find that information and take this to the next step. But
and if they found her grave, is her phone in there, her overnight bag? We don't really have any indication that they ever found that. So if they found this grave, could they find more information about what happened to her that night?
Yeah.
I think what's also interesting for me too, so we know there are no tool marks of, no decapitation or no someone getting rid of her hands. I do think it's so interesting though, because even though this really strong monsoon blew through, pushes her out of the shallow grave, the rest of her is still intact. And her bracelet is still on her. So I don't know how the rest of her isn't.
Yeah.
Good point.
So where does this case stand today?
In 2015, the FBI got involved on Adrienne's case because a suspected serial killer, whose name is Brian Patrick Miller, was arrested for the brutal killings of two young women in the 1990s. And it was reported that he was actually at a party in Adrienne's neighborhood around the time that she went missing. So that's certainly something very interesting to look into. To date, though, the detectives haven't released any information about his possible connection to this case. Adrienne's case is really now at a point where investigators could benefit from the public's help.
There is a $20,000 reward being offered to anyone who provides information about the person or persons responsible for Adrienne's death. This family and this community are looking for and deserve answers. If you know anyone that lives in the Phoenix area, please share this video with them so we can keep the awareness raised to this case. And please share Adrienne's story where other caring people can find it.
If you're looking for a place to meet like-minded true crime enthusiasts and advocates while also engaging in ethical case discussions, look no further than the Uncovered community. In our community, you can attend live webinars presented by experts. We even have a space that is completely dedicated to this series with John Lordan, and we discuss all of the cases we've covered in each episode.
Mm-hmm. And we managed to wrangle John into doing a live case discussion with us sometime soon. So if you're a fan of John, there's another reason to join our community. But regardless of whether you join our community or not, you still have access to the Uncovered database, where you can see all of our sources and a full timeline of Adrienne's suspicious death.
Adrienne Salinas' case needs more exposure. She was just beginning to experience life. She was literally fighting for the love of her life. Her family and friends deserve justice to be given to whoever took her away from all of them. If you have any information regarding this case, please contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI, which is 1-800-225-5324, or call the Tempe, Arizona Police Department at 480-350-8311. Thank you to the Salinas family, the Adrienne Salinas Memorial Facebook page, Press Reader, Murdercast Podcast, Dark Dark World Podcast, True Crime Stories Podcast, CBS News, AZ Family, ABC 15, Arizona Daily Sun, my friend and co-host on Crime After Crime, Danielle Hallen's YouTube channel, USA Today, Arizona Daily Star, the East Village Tribune, NamUs, Reddit, Web Sleuths, and Wikipedia. Also, a very big thank you to my friends at uncovered.com and co-hosts on today's show, Rachel Rosalette and Andrea Cipriano. Please join us again in 2 weeks as we look into another mystery that deserves to be uncovered.